Today, we have a large program in California that's been really focused around beach safety. So we've had an increase in a particular species of shark, and as a result, that's raised concern about safety. So the state of California invested money, and the program that I'm going to talk about today has a research component. They want to better understand what sharks are doing off beaches. Because at the end of the day, when you talk about shark and human confidence, but we're talking about our behaviors. So your choices are, if you want to try and manage bars, you can either try to manage your shark's behavior, which is very difficult because we still don't really fully understand why they do what they do. Or you can try to manage human behavior. And in fact, we know a lot about human behavior, but don't really even understand why people do. So it becomes a very difficult challenge. But what I'm going to talk about this afternoon is really what we're learning about sharks. And really what I want to point out is the information that we're learning gets communicated to the landlords who are responsible for public safety. But more importantly, it gets communicated to the public because those are the people who do share the ocean with these animals. So the other thing I want to point out is in California, the assumption that the government makes is that when you enter the ocean, you are to enjoy your wild place. Just like if you were to go into a forest, you would go into the mountains. The lifeguards are there to provide some safety, but it is not their full responsibility to ensure that we're safe. Lifeguards are only on duty during certain times of day, and therefore, if you want to swim after hours, you are entering the ocean at your own risk. So in California, we're trying to educate and inform people of what we call the Disneyland effect. So when you go to Disneyland, the assumption is when you're on a ride. No? Yeah. All right. So when you're on a ride, your safety is guaranteed. So what we have to have people understand is when you're going pushing, your safety is not guaranteed. It is your responsibility to know the risks when you go in the ocean. So the reason why this is an issue in California is because for over 100 years, the shark population, the white sharks in particular, have been stressed due to overfishing. They were caught in fisheries, and many of the things that you really like seals, sea lions, whales, and dolphins, had been hunted to the verge of extinction by the early 1990s. And what we've been seeing is some really interesting things. For example, despite the fact that white sharks occasionally bit and even killed people in California, the state of California enacted protection for them in 1994 because they were concerned about their ecological role in the ocean. And as you can imagine, that caused quite a bit of concern but nonetheless, that was done not just in California, but is done throughout federal waters. It is illegal to catch and take white sharks. They are fully protected. So with this increase in white sharks, what we've also seen are bites, and not surprisingly, bites have gone up over the last century. But in California, what's really interesting is that bite rates have remained fairly stable. The red indicate fatalities, the blue are non-fatalities, and then the gray are kind of unknown incidents. So what you'll notice is that, at least over the last 50 years, things have been fairly consistent, despite the fact that our shark population is going up, and the number of people using the water is also over. So on average, we have between 0 and 7 bites per year. On average, it's called breathe. 97% of those were attributed to white sharks. Less than 10% are fatal. And there's some really interesting reasons of that. Most of it has to do with the fact we have a heavily populated coastline. A lot of our water users are first responders, well-trained, and people that have been even severely by white sharks from the time they're bitten to the time they're in a full-fledged trauma center is 30 minutes. And that's resulted in a lot of people with their bad bites surviving each bites. So when we look at these, the most Californians, predominantly surfers and boarders, and of course we see a rise in bites in more recent years with swimmers as it becomes more popular in kayakers as well. So one of the concerns is when white shark population rising, and we're seeing more and more white sharks along the coast, lifeguards are noting a 5-fold increase in the last 10 years, and that raised concern.
In addition, the sharks are very close to the beaches. And in Southern California, it's one of the most heavily populated coast towns in the world, with 20 million people living within 40 kilometers of the coast. And we have a climate where people are using ocean recreation year-round. So ocean recreation is a $1 billion annual industry in Southern California alone, and there are 2.3 million surfers in California. So you have to understand, this is a big recreational activity. This is in like a day, 10,000 people in the water at any given time in this bay. So what we noticed in 2010, when the white shark population started to rise, was that lifeguards were closing beaches just because white sharks were sighted off those beaches. So the beach closures were increasing in frequency. However, since 2020, we've seen a substantial decrease in the number of hikes. So one of the things that's really interesting, I just showed you, the bite rate is fairly stable despite the fact that the number of strikes is increasing and the number of people using the water is increasing. But when bites occur, just like anywhere else, they get a lot of media attention. And that tends to cause a lot of concern. Occur. And when you respond to that, either through temporary beach closures, it results in economic impacts to those coastal communities. So quite often we work with the lifeguards. They're responsible for safety at beaches. And they wanted to know, why are these sharks on our beach? How long are they going to be there? Is it safe for people to be in the water amongst the sharks? And at the time, we said, we don't know. We really don't know anything about those animals. So we received funding in 2018 to form the California Shark Beach Safety Program. And our goal was trying to answer some of the questions lifeguards were asking us. What sharks are out there? When are they there? What are they like? When are they with people? Do they respond to people? And then, of course, we need to understand, how do people feel about that? So if you know there are white sharks off your beach, how does that feel? And then what are the economic impacts resulting to beach closures? So as a result, this information that we get using a variety of technology, and that's what we're focusing on today, is then given to our education program and our outreach program. So a third of our overall operating budget goes to education and outreach. So we use a variety of technologies to study and answer that list of questions. So one form of technology we use are called spot tags. So if the shark is caught, we can bolt this on the shark's dorsal fin. Every time it comes to the surface, it's sending a signal to a satellite. I get a text or an email saying the shark is at this latitude, longitude, time, and date. When the shark goes underwater, we lose track of this. So sharks are not like marine mammals. They do not have to be with the surface, so we don't get a lot of data. The other technique we use are called pop-off or guidance satellite tags. These get darted to the shark's back. They measure temperature, light, and depth. And then at a pre-described time of day, this light pops off and floats up to the surface, uploading the data of the satellite, then downloading to me. So we get a really accurate record of the temperature and depth that it moved through. But we don't get a really accurate record where the shark actually is. So if we want to know how close the shark is to a beach, we use what's called acoustic telemetry, and we can either stick transmitter surge into the body, or we can dart it into the shark's back. These transmitters have 3 to 10 year battery lives. And when a shark swims within about 300 meters of one of our underwater receivers that are located 200 meters off the beach, the receiver logs the time, the date, and the ID number of that shark. So it allows us to monitor activity along our beaches. The fourth technology we use are called smart tags. Think of this like a fin weight for a shark. Temporarily get put in the dorsal fin, measures every motion shark makes, videotapes what the shark sees, and then pops off, and we can download that and ask what was the shark doing in that day. So the way we tag sharks in California is a little different from other locations. One way is commercial fishers who aren't legally allowed to catch them, incidentally catch them. And when they do, they bring them to us so that we can measure them, take tissue samples, tag them, and release them. And in fact, what we found is white sharks that can be in their fishing nets for up to 24 hours and still be able to. We have heard that based on the technology we use. The other technique we use are what we call jab tag. So a lot of times spotting with a drone or a helicopter, we can see the sharks. We can dry wrap board inside them. We can dip camera underneath them so we can tell if they're a male or a female. And then we can dart a transmitter into their back. And by using the size of the bow, we can estimate the size of the shark from the video we did. And then the other way we use is called strike netting. This is where we see a shark swimming along the beach. we can put a piece of net right in front of the shark and handle it immediately, then pull it out. So we never fish with bait while ages in Southern California. We don't do any fishing on pigeons. Okay, so this are the locations of all our receivers. We have about over 100 and this is part of the California coastline that extends that's about 400 kilometers. So all these locations are our receivers. These are our buoys. And then we have receivers around the offshore islands where the adult wet sharks hang out. But most of the juveniles, between 1.25 and about 3 years, use this Southern California beach as a nursery habitat. So this is the report. Every month, my divers will download all those receivers. Every month, we give a report like this to the lifeguards that tells them what sharks were detected out at the beach. And we give them all the information, the sizes, the sex and shark, when he's tagged. And the lifeguards came back and said, a month is too long. What if there's a 3-liter wet shark off my beach today? So by working with the manufacturer of the technology, we developed a new system. Here we go. Which is called a LOWE group. So this has an acoustic receiver right here. Now when a tagged shark fits within 300 meters of the buoy, that sends the text alert to lifeguards, telling them that a tagged shark is in that proximity. So we have 12 of these out on the beaches, providing lifeguards with prisons on data. So the goal, and by the way, only lifeguards get this information. It is not publicly available yet because it is not an early warning system. It is not used that way in California. It is used as a science tool. So we were training the lifeguards how to interpret the behavior that they see, the patterns of the behaviors of the sharks. So the buoys gather a lot of information, detections of the animals, seafloor, sea air temperature, a variety of different parameters that help them then interpret what were conditions like that might have allowed sharks to come there. So our lifeguards are becoming scientists. So this is what that text alert leads them to. This is what the website looks like. This is the map showing that where the buoys are. Green means a recent detection. White means no detection. Red means buoys offline. Each one of these panels you see is a tagged shark. And it gives them information about the temperature, depth, how recently it was detected. And then if lifeguards click on one of those, it gives them all the stats of that individual. So it tells them how big that shark was when it was tagged, it's set, where was it at, and where is that shark at. So again, lifeguards are now using this as a tool to manage species. In the early days, if a 3-meter wet shark was sighted off the beach, it will pull the people out of the water. Now, because they're using this system, at some beaches, there are 40 between 1.5 and 3-meter sharks out there every single day, all day long. And no surfers are reporting seeing the sharks. So they no longer pull people out of the water, they go science. So as a result, they have reduced beach closures by over 88%. Our back of the envelope calculation is every time they close a beach, that beach community can lose anywhere from $50,000 to $250,000 a day, US, in lost revenue. So just by using this system, lifeguards have been able to reduce beach closures. So this indicates the number of sharks. We have about 230 sharks swimming around with active tags right now. And you can see that over time, the numbers have been increasing. You'll also see that we detect more sharks in the summer, which is also beach season in California. So you can see the numbers are fairly high. On average, we detect about 35 different individuals, and we may get tens or even hundreds of thousands of detections from those individuals during those summers. There we go. So using some of the other technology, we've been able to figure out how far sharks migrate. Now, this was a baby when shark caught off Los Angeles. And up here, you'll see a black sponge. This is an animation. And you're going to see this is seawater temperature. You can see this shark is hanging out off this beach all summer long. And when we get to October, you're going to see the water temperature drop. And that is a cue that initiates a southern migration. So pretty much every young shark, wet shark that we tag exhibit this seasonal pattern. Now we had an opportunity to do a very interesting experiment. This shark was taken to Monterey Aquarium and kept in the aquarium for 5 months. That baby white shark gained 100 pounds, 220 kilos in a Suivi area, 75 kilos in 5 months. And then they released it in Monterey in February when the water temperature was 10 degrees C. And you would think that if you would kill a shark, they just don't like cold water. So the shark very rapidly came all the way down to Mexico. And then what you'll notice in the spring is that during the spring, warm water starts to push up into the Gulf of California, the Sea of Cortez, driving the shark into the Gulf. Right before the tide bumped off, that shark started hanging out at a depth of about 30, 40 meters, where water temperatures were more like 18 degrees. Surface temperatures in the Gulf at that time were 26 degrees C. So what this tells us is that they don't like water too cold, and they don't like water too warm. Okay, so we also know these sharks spawn out in occasionally. They form groups. Typically, when we see one or three, we see sometimes up to 40. So we call these nurseries because we only tend to see juveniles there. We do not see adults. So they form these hotspots. And then there are probably a variety of things that explain these hotspots. So here you can see some sharks swimming around. They're all just outside the wave break. In this image are 9 white sharks. That's about 100 meters across. There's the wave break. So the most we've seen at an aggregation site in the same day is 40 white sharks, between 1.5 and 3 years long. So the hypothesis we have as to why these sharks like to come to the beach to hang out is that when they're born, we don't know where birth occurs, but the babies are on their own. They get no parental care. So the safest place for them to be is in shallow water. And then they also like those shallow waters because it's warmer closer to the shore than it is further offshore. And remember, because they get no parental care, they have to learn to feed on their own. So the most abundant food source in these neutral waters are stingrays. So that's primarily what's bringing them in and keeping them at these sites. So we've been able to use that same acoustic telemetry technology that allows us to track it along the coast. If we put these receivers with about 500 meters apart, and a tag shark is detected by 3 or more receivers, we can get a position. We know where the shark is in space. And some of the transmitters have depth sensors on them, so we know how deep they are. So using this technology, we've been able to trap sharks over the last few years. So this is an aggregation site in Southern California that we have up to 40 to 50 individuals there. And what you're seeing is, this is only half a kilometer. So these sharks are moving back and forth along these beaches day in, day out. Some individuals are leaving. New ones are coming in. This is only 1 week's worth of data. So we did this for months and months, and we've had hundreds of thousands of detections. And by looking at this in fine scale, we get a better understanding of how sharks are deciding where they want to be. I want to point out that right here is a public beach, and there are 2 source schools right there. Okay, so we know that sharks make decisions based on the environment changing around. This environment, all these environments, are very dynamic. This is seafloor temperature, and it changes dramatically with tide, time of day, and it's depth stratified, which means it's beyond at the surface and clear along. It's only 10 meters deep, right? So these sharks are making decisions on where they want to be along this small stretch of beach. And remember, there's 25 white sharks hanging out at this beach every single day. So what we've been able to do is develop these EPA maps, ask the sharks what temperatures we prefer. So by doing that, we can go out and map this area 3. So to do that, we have what is called an autonomous underwater vehicle. We program it to move up and down through the water column and to go out and mow the lawn. And here's the AV. There's a white shark right there. And if it grows pattern, and we can map all those environmental parameters in 3D while we're tracking sharks moving through that space and ask them where they want to be. So based on this, by the way, they do hear the AAB, and we did have a biting problem. So they would come over and they'd bite. So that would happen. Now, by the way, I would point out that the water, you can see the water clarity is not very good. Me and my sales so out, we gather those receivers every month. We've been diving here for 6 years with all their sharks. We have never, ever seen one in the water. Now, probably is because we can't see. We know they're biased, but we've never actually seen one. So when we look at the temperatures that are available to them across this habitat, across the months, relative to where they prefer to be, what we find is the sharks prefer the warmer parts of the habitat. So their favorite place is between 16 and 22 degrees C. And they have a high selection for 20 to 22, but if it gets too warm, they don't like that. If it gets below 14 C, they're out. They do not like it. In fact, we had a situation. So before I get to that, this is the depth profile. So up here, what you're seeing are the movements of the sharks. And every morning and dawn and dusk, they go to the bottom. We think to be. And then during the day, they're up to the surface. So this is the thermocline. This is the upper warm layer that you notice they prefer to be in. But occasionally will dive through that. So this is just for October, 1 week in October. And then in November, we had a storm come in that brought a big slug of upwell cold water into the air. And you'll notice that the sharks that remained were moving all throughout the water, and most of them left. So this is that event. And here you can see the different sizes of the sharks relative to the water temperature. So this is throughout the summer. Then we get this cold event when the water temperature drops and almost all the sharks leave. And what's really interesting is it took 5 days for them to search around to notice that water temperatures weren't coming back up. And when that happened, many sharks migrated away. So by gathering this data, we've been able to demonstrate information that tells us a lot about the behavior that lifeguards use to say there are going to be fewer sharks in the water because conditions have gotten lower temperatures. The other technology to use, these are our smart tags. Remember, this is like a Fitbit for a shark. It's got a 3D accelerometer, a 3D gyroscope, a 3D magnetometer compass heading, depth water temperature sensor, and it's measuring their things 30 times a second. It has a video logger that this clamps on the shark's dorsal fin like a little backpack, points down the nose. We release the shark, and the shark swims around for 24 hours, and after that, the device pops off. So by using this, we capture every motion the sharks make while we're following shark. So what we get is something that looks like this. So this is a shark that we track in our Long Beach Harbor, which, by the way, is the third largest fresh port in North America. The shark aggregation was in the port. And you can see the sharks moving all around through the port. The tail liquid, see how fast it's swimming, its total activity, the water temperature it's at. So this gives us a lot of information. In addition, the other interesting thing we found is that 2 of the 3 sharks we tracked would do this interesting behavior where they would swim a 10-meter diameter circle in one direction for 20 minutes and then reverse and go in the opposite direction for 20 minutes. Back and forth for 4 hours. 2 to 3 sharks we tracked did that. And we think that that was how these sharks that never stop swimming actually sleep. So researchers that trap migratory birds put little hats on them that measure their brain waves. And what they do is they're continuously flying while they migrate. They turn off half their brain to fly in a circle in one direction. They turn off the other half of their brain to fly in a circle in the other direction. So believe it or not, this may be evidence of how a shark that must continuously swim actually breathes. Now you may ask, why is this important? Well, the reason why it's important is we recently had an incident where a swimmer was out swimming at one of those aggregation sites. The water was very murky, felt something bumping in the chest when he was swimming. He came out to figure out what it was, and a shark came and bit her on the chest. That was a juvenile. Fortunately, it wasn't a very bad bite. But what we think actually happened was that he startled a sleeping shark. So again, by knowing more about these behaviors, we get a better understanding of why bites may occur and under what conditions. Sleeping time. So we do think, by the way, these animals are spending hours, hundreds of hours at these sites. So they can't just be feeding. So they have to be doing other things. So understanding what they're doing while they're there is very important. So see that sharks are very close to people. So by using drones, we've been able to monitor this. Go to the next slide. So one of my stints surveys the drones at 26 beaches
over 1,600 surveys. His goal was to count how many people we saw out in water. You can go next slide. So he counted how many surfers, sweaters, stand-up paddlers, waders he saw. He measured their distance from the wayway and from the shoreline, and they also measured their distance from any sharks, right? So he did this for 2 years across 20 species, very large, detailed study. So this is what this looks like. This is the information the drone gives us. So it gives us really accurate information in a permanent way. So we can go back and look at it again and again and use it for different purposes. So we developed a machine learning algorithm now that we identified all those objects. So what took us weeks and months to analyze data, we do in minutes now. So this is identifying all the different objects for the users. Now the cities are very interested in this technology, not because we're looking at shark-human interaction. They don't know how many people use the water or what they're doing when they're at their beaches. So this is actually being used by many of those municipalities to decide whether they need to increase lifeguard buckets. So one of the things he found was at this site, this is the site where I showed you the animation. So these are all locations where he saw white sharks. The blue are where he counted and measured surfers. So you'll notice that all the times he saw sharks were right in close proximity to surfers. The red indicates the extent of where he saw sharks. And then if we compare this other shark aggregation site, again, you'll notice the blue is where he saw people. The triangle is where he saw sharks. And there's a reef break right here. This is a very favored reef break in Southern California where a lot of people go there to surf. So you'll notice that most of the sharks are hanging down in the same place. Now, the interesting thing about this study is that lifeguards actually use it for this reason. There are 10 beach access points along this beach, which explains why people are spread out all over the beach. There's only one beach access point right here. So what lifeguards do is that they have an aggressive shark. A shark gets acting aggressively, and it's typically going into the beach. They just close beach access here. The rest of the beach remains open. They just close that. The other thing that we found, which is very interesting, is that surfers and swimmers in Southern California are unwilling to walk more than 200 meters from a parking lot. They're lazy in California. Too many surf breaks to choose from. So the other question is, what are they doing when they're at those beaches? They're there all the time. They must be feeding. What are they eating? This video, all those dots you see are stingrays. We call them pancakes. The sharks love to get them because they're very instandard. They're easy prey. So we wanted to look at diet. So to look at diet and simple foods, it's taking muscle biopsies of sharks so that we can look at their stable isotopes, chemical signatures in their muscle, and we can compare that to the stable isotopes, so the chemical signatures in prey found in application, and see what are they eating. In addition, we could count and measure the size of the prey to figure out which food is at that beach. And then we would also take water samples and then measure eDNA, the amount of prey DNA and what shark DNA is at that beach. We used probes. These are beta remote video systems, and we weren't using them to count sharks. We were actually using them to count shark food, how much shark food is present. So we used all these tools simultaneously to ask how much food is present. And we did it at 2 aggregation sites and 2 non-aggregation sites. So one of the things we found was that at aggregation sites, they were actually feeding down all the favorite things they like to eat: stingrays, small sharks. And by the way, these are all things in the body. Wearables to the people on the surface. Humans are plots at beach. So in this case, it's actually feeding down these areas, and that's making sharks move to other non-aggregation sites, forming new aggregation sites. So by understanding that, we can now monitor prey populations and ask, when might sharks eat? So all of this work is supported by the state of California. The program is funded by the state of California, but all our local municipalities, all our ocean for beach communities also subsidize the program and are very involved. So we work with all the ocean lifeguards of California. They are our research partners. And then again, all the information I just gave you is given to lifeguards and is also given to the general public. So they have a better understanding of what sharks do off those beaches. And our social science program is already starting to find
that the more people know about the sharks, the less they fear.